about it is certainly, I think, particularly confusing for local government folks and just our public in general. I'll try to touch on some of those things, at least a perspective. Hanover County, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we're kind of unique in that we have a pretty distinct urban core, and we associate with the Richmond region some of the larger localities like VACo and Chesterfield, but we also have a very rural section of farming and agricultural lands that we seek to preserve. So we're kind of unique in that we sort of bridge that gap between a more urban culture and a rural culture, which presents its own set of challenges when we're commuting with our public. Can I see a show of hands for any of the larger localities in here maybe that have to implement this federal NPDS program, or any of you here? See a couple of folks. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I will touch on it towards the end. But back to this area of stormwater, it really encapsulates a lot of things. And, some of the things I put on my list are erosion sediment control. It's been around for a long time at the local government level. I think you're familiar with that. Many of us have what we call Chesapeake Bay Act programs. Those in the eastern part of the state, sort of east of 95, have had to run these for nearly 20 years now. There's this newer program called the Virginia Stormwater Management Program, which is moving forward to sort of integrate many of these principles. There's a federal construction permit everybody has to get. It sort of overlaps with all this stuff. But that's something individual builders and constructors have to get, this construction permit. And then for some of the larger localities now, we're thrust into a regulatory environment with the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's administered by the state. But we refer to this as MS4 programs, but it's really a very broad federal permit that affects us in really every aspect of local government. Stormwater management. In the state, in the past 20 or so years, we've had sort of a bifurcation of local government duties. Those to the east have run stormwater management programs, and then we've had these localities, such as Hanover, that have had federal permits, and then a whole host of localities here shown in red really just have erosion sediment control programs and the state oversight. What's changed now is there's a new rule that says local governments have to implement a stormwater program. So some folks have had an opportunity to run these programs and evolve over time. Some folks are going to have to start out from scratch. And that's what everybody's faced with coming up July 1, 2014. What is it? It's really a shift from the state to local governments for permitting of everything. And I think the concept that's been presented, and I support this, is it does represent one-stop shopping. It's an opportunity for our clients, I think, at the local level to come to one entity for this particular permit. And it's not something that a lot of folks are passionate about getting. You know, it's a lot of negatives that go along with it. But I think the positives for local government as we get into it, to some degree, we get to control our destiny. My experience lends itself that that's probably better for our clients than not. I'll use some examples going along. Ultimately, I do think it'll result in a little better or improved water quality. Nobody knows our issues locally like us at the local government level, so I think that's an opportunity for us. DEQ's been listening lately. One of the things that we're all challenged by is Hanover, we're going to deal with this on every single family housing project. So DEQ has listened, and I'll talk briefly maybe about this permit by rule thing, but they're sort of phasing how we may have to address this, and I think it's helpful that they're considering that single families are a little different, and maybe how we approach that. I'm glad for that. And then we have all these grandfathering issues. You almost have to run two different programs. There's everybody that had things before a certain time, and there's everybody that had things after a certain time. So your staff are going to have to run two technical programs almost in parallel for as much as 10 years out in the future, and that's a pretty big challenge. The new regulations that we're all having to deal with unquestionably are more stringent. Nobody really realizes the bust we almost got hit with, because the legislature a few years ago, working with VACo and others, suspended what we had and went back to the drawing board. And I'm thankful they did, because that was impossible. But this stuff is still tough. It's tough, it's expensive for new developers in particular to comply with. One point I would make, because I think at the moment it's a little underutilized, is looking forward in your locality, you ought to consider a couple of the carve-outs that are in the regulations and how that can help you locally. A couple of the things we're looking at in Hanover are the alternative criteria for stream channel, and even how we deal with things like flooding. There's some alternate criteria for flooding. Because there are rules, for example, like automatic 10-10 detention on every outfall, we don't like that. We'd rather deal with flooding more comprehensively, and we look at flooding more comprehensively, and there's a carve-out in the regs that allows you to adopt that and deal with it. You can find that it's helpful. The energy balance, and none of you know what these terms mean, but this energy balance methodology is very complex. But what we found is if you're in Amherst County, and you have rock channels, it's going to be really almost overly burdensome because it's a discharge rate that's based on your pre-development rate of flow, and then it's sort of ratcheted down based on the volume calculation. And it may not have any relationship with what your receiving stream can actually sustain. So we're using an approach called permissible velocities and looking more at what are the characteristics of that channel and what's permissible, and will it work? But that's another carve out in the rule that we're using to sort of cater these regs to make it work for us. And I think they're underutilized, and I would invite you to consider them as time goes on and your staff get experience with the program. Maybe there's some opportunities. The last thing that's out here is this private sector trading, where folks will be able to trade or purchase water quality credits for some part of their demand on a site. So if you've got a 5-acre site and you find it's really expensive, more so, then you can actually buy private sector credits and supplant those. So that's going to be one of these areas, again, for your staffs to understand and when you can and can't trade. It's just a whole new arena out there. Some of the application requirements, you have to identify, who's the authority, who's going to implement this. You have a new ordinance, you have to have a funding and staffing plan, procedures for approval. Many of you already have this in your development review processes. Bonds, inspections being a big one. And then lots of reporting, long-term maintenance, how to make sure whatever gets built gets maintained over time. This new topic, TMDLs, there are going to be special provisions for adhering to TMDLs that are going to start to affect people over time. And then you have to have an enforcement program. How are you going to enforce this thing? Lots of challenges. I think the biggest one I would just highlight is it's complex and confusing. For us that have Chesapeake Bay programs, we have as many as 3 different thresholds for permitting. We have a 2,500 square foot threshold. We have a 1-acre threshold. And then we have issues about single family. Are you part of a common plan of development, like a subdivision or not? I submit to you, it takes almost a matrix to figure that out. So that's going to be an education challenge for our regulated public. There are even some definitional issues. If you look at the different statutes between E&S and Chesapeake Bay and stormwater, things like agriculture are treated differently. Now for us over time, agriculture is a big component, so we've had to thread that needle. In Hanover, you either get a conservation plan with the soil and water district to clear a big block of land, or you work through a permit process. You're building barns, you get a permit process, but that's something folks struggle with. But don't come into Hanover and say you're not regulated and start clearing a 50-acre block of land and let all the sediment run in, because that's not true in Hanover anymore. So we work with either the soil and water district to make sure you've got your agricultural plans in place, or you work through a permit process. But definitionally, again, it's confusing to our clients. I think locally folks are starting to understand, but we got a lot of folks from adjacent county that's never done this before, and starts to say, well, I didn't know I had to do this. Some solutions looking forward, for me, and in my experience, it's about building strong relationships with the regulatory agencies. And I know sometimes it's hard to do because I think naturally we'll want to blame them for the situation we're in. But I submit to you that we're going to be better off in a co-regulator environment than we are in a different relationship. A strong co-regulator reliant. As I've worked with DEQ, and particularly in recent times, I've been pleased with how supportive they've been to my inspectors. When my inspectors are talking to a contractor and asking them to do things, they don't always get the reaction they need. Well, every 3 or 4 weeks, we've had the state rep coming through sort of auditing individual projects, and they've been very good about, reinforcing what our inspectors have said and said, look, you've got to do these things, and issuing sort of separate but parallel enforcement notices that support what we've been doing. And they haven't been coming in willy-nilly and issuing contradictory statements. Now, I've heard different stories in other localities, but that's something that's been very helpful for us because it's been a reinforcing relationship, and they've communicated with us so that we're not issuing conflicting messages. And that's what I mean by co-regulator. And I'm looking forward to continuing to mature that. It also helps with folks like us that have to deal with EPA. If you're an MS4 locality and you end up getting an independent audit by EPA, it's a scary thing. Maybe you've heard there have been tens of thousands of dollars of fines issued on localities all over the state from EPA directly. And what we want is, when EPA comes in, we want DEQ standing there beside us as a co-regulator, but that's really the first line of defense, because they are the delegated authority in this state. EPA really doesn't have any business, they have the right, but they really don't have any business coming in directly to localities issuing enforcement actions. And we want to ask DEQ to intervene. Okay, they've successfully done that in a number of settings over time. But that's what I mean by that co-regulated relationship. We're a lot better off with DEQ as our intervening regulator issuing enforcement notices to us than we are EPA coming in directly. And that's something that, again, to mature over time, to try to push EPA out of the state a little bit and let the state and the local governments deal more cooperatively. Anyway, just some things there. I think DEQ, from what I've seen, is willing to sort of phase this in. We recognize how complex it is, so as we start, we've got to get the big things under our belt first, and then over time, some things will start to evolve, like single families. How do you regulate every single family? We're not going to start day one doing that perfectly. So having they can't say the rules don't matter, but at the same time, they can have a little discretion on how they enforce that on us. They can work with us, make sure we get our base program down, and then over time, make sure we're doing our other dots I's and cross their T's. That's my hope, and I've seen some indication, at least from the upper management, that they're thinking in that regard. So I'm going to try to continue to be optimistic about where we're heading. I know we're running short on time, so I'll be very quick. Some priorities for me are resolving this common plan of development, single families. Just implementing the program, and then hopefully the state will go back and open up some flexibility on what we can and can't use as BMPs. They've been pretty restrictive in their own views about how specific you had to be, but I think they've recognized maybe they've been almost too restrictive, so we're hoping they'll open that door up a little bit. With regard to MS4, I'll briefly touch on that, but it doesn't affect most of you, but I would submit you all should think about what's happening to your other localities that have this permit. Okay, because one day it's going to happen to you. I think it's just the nature of the business. One thing for us is MOUs with our other entities, our schools and so forth, looking at stormwater. But I think the first place you'll see this impact you is when you have a local government interest that has a permit of some sort, a solid waste permit. You'll start to see, I think in the next 3 or 4 years, you'll start to see DEQ have to audit you for stormwater compliance. So you'll start to be faced with the municipal facilities issues we're already faced with. Are you doing good housekeeping and cleaning? Are you letting your trash compactors leak on the ground? Okay? If you are, that's a problem. If you have waste oil containers that people recycle oil at, and that stuff's leaking on the ground and susceptible to rainwater, you can bet you're going to see somebody in the next 3 or 4 years to make an issue out of that. And it might come with a pretty heavy civil fine. So I would submit you need to pay attention to these issues and make sure you're running a clean shop, even though you don't have a permit right now, because there are mechanisms that are going to affect you over time. For us, this is our little urban area, it's where the big things are. We're really analyzing that to make sure we know what our relationship to this thing called the Chesapeake Bay watershed model is. You need to understand that relationship. You need to understand your relationship to other sources like agriculture. For us, that urban load's about 9% of the load. We project it could cost us $231 million if they enforced it across the whole county over the next 15 years. That debt service maximum is about $177 million. That's a big number for us. Right now, under the permit, we're having to treat about 1%, and we've carved that down to about $10 million. We feel pretty optimistic about that, but it shows you the difference between where we are and where we could be under increasing regulation. Urban retrofits and treatment of stormwater is a lot more expensive than anything else. That's what this chart shows you, anything else that we can do. You're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a pound versus dollars a pound in other source sectors. So if 9% of our load is urban and 91% is agriculture and forestry, you know, are we putting our money in the right place first? I don't know, but those questions will continue to get asked. We're looking at our existing county facilities across the board. This is just an example. Stream channels that are eroded. We have some sins in the past we need to fix. But this is where our bang for the buck comes in when we start having to deal with these Chesapeake Bay TMDL. So inventory, which you have over time, so you can know how you can retrofit things most cost effectively. Not a big deal for you that don't have permits yet, but it is something for you to think about moving forward, particularly your municipal facilities. So with that, I'll end and thank you. Okay, we'll answer questions next.
Okay, questions and answers.
All right, I need 3 hands to make this work. I need to follow my script because I know some of you have heard me before and you know that if I'm not controlled, I'll just keep going. Again, thanks for having me here. I'm real happy to come and talk to you about solid waste management, and I'm wearing 2 hats today. First is the Executive Director of the Virginia Peninsulas Public Service Authority. We are an authority of 10 cities and counties, Hampton, Pocosin, York County, James City, Williamsburg. We go across the York River, Matthews, Middlesex, Essex, King and Queen, and King William. I hope I got them all. I'm also here as the president of the Old Dominion chapter of the Solid Waste Association of North America, which is SWANA, and I want to put a plug in for SWANA at the very end. Let me hit the right one. Okay, this is what most citizens think about when they hear the word solid waste management. They roll their cart out to the curb in the morning on collection day. They come home at night, and the can is empty, and they roll it back to their garage, and life is good. They place their trash in the can at the curb, and then hope that someone during the day will make it disappear. And that's solid waste management to a large portion of the public. If the citizen lives in an area without curbside collection in a more rural area, I guess I got to do this, don't I? There we go. If they're in a more rural area, there's a different way of making the trash appear. After a ride in the back of the pickup truck, the trash is placed in a compactor, and then it disappears. We tell our employees that we are a lot like the power company. Nobody wakes up in the morning, none of us woke up this morning, turned on the light and said, good job, Dominion Power, or whoever provides power up here. It's something that we just take for granted. And solid waste management is another one of these services that the public just takes for granted. Mike, that's all he deals with, is services. As a director of public works, all he deals with are services that the public takes for granted. And solid waste management is one of them. I'll go to the next one. There we go. About 40 years ago, the EPA proposed a hierarchy of solid waste management. The most desirable practice was waste prevention or waste minimization. Solid waste managers still use this today. And the presentation I have just goes through these. And the first one is waste prevention, is just simply preventing waste from being generated. It can be done by individuals, local governments, small business, large corporations. Walmart has a program in place to minimize or prevent waste generation by requiring their suppliers to minimize packaging. Reuse is, again, something that we can all do, and it's just using something after it's been determined that its useful life has come to an end. Donating clothing to Goodwill, making a tire swing is reuse. Tearing down an old barn and taking the siding and putting in a fancy new house is reuse. Now we'll go through the rest of them. Rest of them in a little more detail. The Virginia Solid Waste Management Planning Regulations require that all local governments be involved in recycling in some way. And one of the most common throughout the state is drop-off recycling, and citizens just drive to a location and drop off their metal cans, their glass bottles, plastic bottles, corrugated cardboard, paper, goes into the container. When they're full, a driver comes and picks it up and makes it disappear. Those materials are then manufactured into new products. If you live in a more urban or suburban area, you'll have curbside recycling. Again, citizens place the materials in the bin, drag them out to the curb, and again, they disappear. Many curbside programs throughout the state and the nation are moving from bins to carts. The carts do a lot of things. First of all, they're a lot easier for the resident to get them out to the curb. They're bigger, so they can hold more material. And because they're bigger, you can decrease the frequency of collection. So you go from weekly collection to every other week collection. What that does is that reduces the costs for the hauler, and therefore he can transfer that cost savings to the local governments that are providing the service. Contrary to what most citizens believe, recycling does not result in this tremendous influx of cash to the local governments. Curbside recycling in particular provides a great convenience to the resident, and the local governments who pay for this pay for that convenience. The revenue from the sale of materials for drop-off recycling can cover all the costs, and in many cases it can even make money. But curbside recycling, the local governments will end up paying a significant amount. Let's take the first look behind the curtain. The industry trend is towards what we call single stream recycling, mixing everything together. And it makes it easier for the resident. You get more material recycled, but what it does is it requires somebody to separate it out, and the material will end up at a processing facility. And this is what it looks like before it gets processed. It's just a big mess of everything, all mixed together. The processing facilities that are used are very sophisticated. They're combinations of screens, magnetic separators, other equipment. The more sophisticated facilities will use eddy current separators and optical sorters to complete the sorting. It's a very complicated and a very expensive process. And at the back end, there are these nice bales of paper, corrugated cardboard, plastic bottles, aluminum cans, and then all of these materials are then sold and remanufactured into new products. Composting. Large-scale composting is not as common as recycling. There are a number of really good examples of compost facilities in Virginia. One is Spotsylvania County, which composts wastewater biosolids. And then VIPSA operates a facility in York County, and we accept between 25 and 30,000 tons a year of leaves, grass, and brush, and turn that into compost and mulch. And there is a considerable revenue that can be realized from the sale of those materials. Energy recovery, we're moving down to the bottom of the hierarchy. We're almost to the bottom. Energy recovery is just the incineration of solid waste and the recovery of the energy in the form of either steam or electrical generation. There are a number of large facilities in Virginia, one in Fairfax County operated by Covanta. There's also one in Chesapeake that is operated by Wheelabrator that serves the 8 cities and counties down in southeast Virginia. The city of Hampton operates its own facility and sells steam to Langley Air Force Base. Despite its place at the bottom of the solid waste hierarchy and all the emphasis on everything else, most of the solid waste generated in Virginia is in fact landfilled. And the information on this slide and the next slide are from DEQ reports. These are all the landfills accepting municipal solid waste in Virginia. As of today, there are 12 privately operated landfills. Those are the blue dots, and there are 36 publicly operated landfills. Those are the red dots. The publicly operated facilities are operated either by cities or counties or regional authorities. All landfills are not equal, and I'm not going to pick on anybody, but just north of Roanoke is Botetourt County. And then down in southeast Virginia, one of the blue dots is the Atlantic Waste Disposal in Waverly. The amount of waste that the Atlantic Waste facility takes before the first coffee break each morning is greater than what the Botetourt County landfill takes in the entire year. So there's just a tremendous range of how much waste comes in to all of these facilities, and each one has their own different problems. The 9 largest landfills in Virginia are privately owned and operated, and those are the blue dots. Of the 12 private landfills in Virginia, 9 of them are owned by 2 companies, Waste Management and Republic Services. Okay. Now I'm going to... Okay. This is where we are today. The DEQ reports provide estimated remaining site life. All of the landfills that have estimated remaining site life of 10 years or less have been removed. So you can just see, let's go back. So all of those landfills have remaining site life of 10 years or less. Just because you have a site life of 10 years left doesn't mean you're going to close in 10 years. You can still, there are many or a number of these are still looking at expansions and continued permits, but there's no guarantee. The point of this is that even right now, there are a lot of counties and cities that don't have landfills, and they rely on somebody else. If you're not working together with somebody else, you will be. If you are in a county with a red dot, you're probably serving one of your neighbors. If you're in one of the counties without a red dot, you're definitely working with somebody. Even if you are working with somebody right now, the chances are good that you'll be working with even more in the future. So the point is that solid waste, or landfill disposal in particular, is a regional activity, and you're going to have to work with your neighbors. One quick thing about closed landfills: nearly every city and county in Virginia has a closed landfill. DEQ requires that the landfill owner conduct groundwater and gas monitoring. And that monitoring must continue until the owner demonstrates that the landfill is not providing any impact on the groundwater at the site. If impacts are detected, you need to determine the extent of the contamination, and you need to provide a corrective action plan. This is frustrating, and I know there's some in here. This is frustrating because closed landfills don't generate any revenue, and all you're doing is spending money for something that just sits there and does, and it's not even, in most parts, it's not even a benefit to the county, and it provides no real return. Okay, let me just finish by saying, first, the public demands excellent service, and we must provide it. Contrary to public opinion, you're not going to get a lot of money from recycling. Regional cooperation is an absolute must. Closed landfills are a drain. And the last thing I want to close with is that your county staff are passionate about solid waste management. And I mentioned SWANA. I've been on the SWANA board for many years. I've been involved with SWANA for many years. I know a lot of the city and county staff throughout the state. They are hardworking, they're dedicated, and they do all of this work with little recognition. They are very innovative, and they really want to do a good job, and they are really very good. And I'm all done. Thank you.
While you're there, I'd like to ask you a question, if you don't mind. In the handout that we got for the supervisors' environmental issues, on page 2, it made the comment, it says, ensuring the state minimum recycling goals are met, 25% for most localities, 15% in more rural communities with higher unemployment rates. I don't understand, what does the unemployment rate have to do with the recycle rate?
I don't know, you have to ask the General Assembly. Can I answer? Larry, Larry knows the answer.
I'll do my best. I think it was about 5 years ago, the General Assembly reviewed the law that is on the books right now, that at that time required all localities to meet recycling rates of 25%. And especially in the more rural counties, it was a real challenge to achieve that 25% rate. So they tried to provide relief to these localities that might have been doing the very best they could, but had recycling rates of maybe somewhere around 12, 15%, 10%, 9%, something like that. And after a study, they really found that there was a correlation between the ability of a locality to achieve that recycling rate and just one criteria. There were probably several other metrics that they used, but one of them was a local government's unemployment rate, and that's why you see that.
Well, it looks like to me unemployment would be great. Now, you give a guy a job and tell him to go clean it up.
And some of them may have done that, yeah.
I have another question while it is we're there. On page number 3, it indicates in your wastewater treatment process that there was the use of chlorine. I thought chlorine was past due.
I'm sorry,
The use of chlorine in order to disinfect your water.
Is that off of this presentation?
Larry, can you repeat the question? We can't hear him back.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do is just hand you the mic.
In the brochure that we were given for the 2014 Supervisor Forum Environmental Issues, I'm looking on page number 3, and on page number 3 it indicates wastewater treatment. And in the process, wastewater treatment process at the bottom, it indicates that chlorine was being used as a disinfectant, but I thought ultraviolet light was where it is we had gone to several years ago, and I thought that was one of the things.
Go back to. That, right there. I think
Right
it's
there,
in
at the
diagram
bottom,
at
in the
bottom.
blue.
wow.
Refresh, you can read it.
Well, I saw it is because I'm familiar with the process.
Yeah, that illustration was basically placed there. and
Oh,
I don't have an answer.
Has it? We just needed an illustration. Okay, that's fine.
Sure, we have.
Go ahead.
There are places with high iron content.
Here it comes.
Sorry, it's early in the morning. There are places, there are counties in Virginia, soon, with high iron content and IR, infrared, will not work on, and you have to use chlorine or cobalt source.
Thank you, Pete, really appreciated that. Okay, I think we have a question over here.
Good morning. All right, so I have two things real quickly. I'd like to talk about incineration for power generation and how we maybe are regionally going to move forward with that, and how are the new boiler mat regulations going to affect progress in that area, whether or not the EPA standards will make it impossible to continue to move forward with meaningful incineration projects that are smaller, for smaller communities. And the second thing I wanted to bring up, Larry, you can help us, maybe we had 7 points in our Ag and Environment Committee we were going to submit for General Assembly this year regarding stormwater. One of them was praying to God, they're going to postpone it for a year. Could you give us an update, please?
Maybe I'll take the second part of your question. Question number 2. First, the other, we may have to do a little research on that one. It is true that when when VACo's Environment and Agriculture Steering Committee met, of course, stormwater was the focus of a lot of the committee discussions. And as a result of that, there were about 9 items that you'll find in our full legislative program, not the brochure that was handed out yesterday, but the full legislative program that would basically propose some, what we would call reforms to Virginia stormwater management law. One of those was a 1-year delay in the compliance deadline for counties to adopt their local stormwater programs, presently being July 1st, 2014, and our proposal calls for it being delayed to July 1, 2015. I will tell you that we have had discussions with several members of the General Assembly about this, and we've had a firm commitment from Senator Emmett Hanger, who just last night notified us that he has in fact put in legislation. We had similar similar communications from, I believe, Delegate Keith Hodges and others. So there's a great deal of interest in it. I will say that if this is something that you do support, we're going to need you active in the General Assembly this upcoming session, because of all the items that we have in our program, that may be the most difficult sell, because I can tell you that it is generating quite a bit of opposition. And Cassandra, with respect to your second question, we'll have to research that unless there's maybe an answer up here.
Can I make a quick add to
Sure.
that point? If the stormwater management plan gets enacted as written, you can count on the Virginia economy moving to North Carolina. But I've talked to Keith Hodges and Tommy Norman, and I have a guy who's developed a case study presentation on the economic impact of the stormwater management plan implementation. I'm John Meyer from Gloucester County. If you are interested in getting a copy of that case presentation, which made a big impact on Tommy Norman, state senator, then I'll be happy to forward one to you. I think this is something that's important for each of you to contact your delegates and your senators and make sure that they understand how strong your support is for the delay and a strong modification for this program. Well, the case study was a church in Virginia Beach, and if the church was built in compliance with the stormwater management plan, the additional cost would be $3 million. Would also lose half the available parking spots that they plan on having for the church. But that's just a quick thumbnail of it.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I want to encourage you and ask you to please send that report to us, because we are in a position right now where we know we're really going to have well, I'll just say our ducks in a row, our facts straight, as we are trying to persuade the General Assembly to understand why we have this position. Any other question? I think over here.
A question for Steve on single stream waste management, and whether, if you give an opinion on how useful it really is. As a citizen and a parent and someone who pays attention to the schools, I was disappointed to see the children, the schools, industry, businesses, families removed from the process of separating and participating in the process. And I wonder if it's what it's cracked up to be with all this technology and energy use that's going into this very expensive process.
And can I add just one thing to that? Single stream in our area now has a different definition, because we have somebody who says put all the trash together, including the recycle, and they're calling that single stream, whereas what you were explaining is separating the recycle and the trash, I believe.
Okay, let me talk about just what I consider conventional single stream recycling, where you have a processing, a large, sophisticated processing facility, and there are not that many in the state. There are several in the Northern Virginia area. There's one in Richmond. There's one down in Chesapeake. But there aren't that many. But when the material ends up at those facilities, I believe it's a very effective means. A couple things that it does. Number one is it turns glass into almost a residue. The single stream processing facilities do a great job of separating out the mixed newspaper, mixed paper, corrugated cardboard, the aluminum cans, the steel cans, the plastic bottles. The optical sorters do a really good job of separating the PET, which are the soda and the water bottles, from the HDPE bottles. So they do a really good job at that. If you are in a more rural area where you don't have those facilities available to you, then single stream is probably not the way to go. And for example, in our 5 rural counties up on the Middle Peninsula, we don't do single stream recycling. We have the containers, so the plastic bottles and the glass is one stream, and then the paper and the corrugated, actually we separate the paper and the corrugated. So although the industry as a whole is moving towards that, there are still pockets where there is some separation. Regarding putting everything together, I personally have my doubts about how well that will work. You get, even with a single stream facility, you get a fairly high residue, probably 15% at a minimum of what comes in goes out as residue. I'm not familiar enough with the operation of, and I think I know which facility you're talking about. I'm not familiar with the operation of that facility, but I have my reservations about how well something like that works. Yeah, there is, and you know, I talk about all these nifty little machines and separators. They're even with the most sophisticated single stream processing facility, there's still a large reliance on hand picking and hand sorting. Right. I'll come back to you. I'm so sorry. I thought you were asking a question.
My question again is for Stephen. When I make a trip to our local regional landfill, even though we have recycling programs in all of our member jurisdictions, and we meet or exceed the state minimums for a rural area, when I look at the waste stream at our landfill, I see too much burnable waste, cardboard, magazines, whatever. It's burnable waste in there. Why have we not seen, and now at our landfill and many others, you're seeing a methane recovery system go in to generate electricity by obtaining the methane. Why, could you give us some thoughts on why we're not seeing more municipal incinerators to take advantage of, all that tremendous amount of burnable waste, even, your plastics, while they have some value as recyclables, they're made of petroleum, and petroleum burns real well. So give us your thoughts on why we haven't seen more municipal incinerators in our state, please.
I think the one big reason why we haven't seen more incinerators, and there are not very many, and the ones that are in place have been in a long time. There were a number of years ago significant concerns about air emissions. Some of who are as old as me will remember the dioxin scare from burning plastics a number of years ago. That was one of the reasons. So there has been a significant pushback against waste energy facilities from an environmental perspective. In addition, in Virginia, you see all those blue dots that we have, and a large percentage of the waste that goes into those blue dots is coming from Maryland, DC, and New York. One of the bad things about being one of the big importers of waste in the country, Virginia is, I don't know where they rank now, but not too long ago, Virginia was the #2 importer of solid waste of out-of-state waste in the country, right behind Pennsylvania. I don't know where we are now, but I'm certain we're still in the top 5. But one of the bad things is that we got all these trucks full of trash coming down I-95. One of the good things is we have really low disposal rates. And when you compare the low disposal rates against the cost of building a waste-to-energy facility, it just doesn't make sense to do anything other than, economically. Let me talk about the paper and the corrugated and the trash. And this is one of the things that drives me personally nuts, and it's a short trip. At our convenience centers, we'll have a compactor right here where a resident can come in and he can put his waste in the compactor. Right next to him is a drop-off recycling container. If he has a stack of paper or a stack of corrugated cardboard, and he puts it in here, we pay $22 a ton, plus the cost of transportation. If he turns around and puts it in here, in the recycling container, we're getting $140 a ton, which we pass along to the counties. And we have all of our recycling facilities have attendants. I encourage our attendants to encourage people to put the recyclables in the containers. We're seeing some improvement. I've told attendants to not tackle people, but we are getting to the point where maybe we do need to do that. But you're right, there's way too much usable material that goes into the trash that not only can be recycled, but can bring money back to the counties. Okay, Liz.
I have a question, but I wanted to say something really quick also about the chlorine in the water. A lot of communities are still using it especially for secondary treatment. I'm from Albemarle County, and we're putting into the tune of $17 million a granulated activated carbon filtration system, but we're still going to use the chlorine after that process before it goes out into the distribution pipes. But my question is, and I know there's at least 4 people in the room that are interested in this because our community is going to have to deal with the VSMPs. And on Wednesday, we're being asked to give staff direction, and 4 of us are new board members, on how we're going to pay for this. And our choices are either to put it in the general funds or to try to do a user pay. And unfortunately, in our situation, we don't own all our stormwater infrastructure. Some of it's VDOT, some of it's homeowner association, some of it's ours. And the other one is a stormwater utility, an authority. And I'd like to know what that looks like and how that works, if you can say a few words about that. Thank you.
Mike, do you want that one part answer?
Well, I think to separate the issues, and yours sounds more specifically related to the MS4 issue of dealing with retrofits of existing urban land. So I'd separate implementing new programs, and we don't know whether it'll land, whether it'll be delayed or not. But with MS4 implementation, I think there's some challenges, particularly for rural. When we analyzed it for ourselves, I think there are even some code issues related to how do you assess a utility-related cost to an individual for things that we've got to pay for under the MS4 program. So I submit to you there's not a good model right now regionally, and the reason being, in our MS4, we're responsible for very succinct local government ownership responsibilities where we have pipe systems and the burden related to those pipe systems, but we need to ask the broad community to pay for it. So it's not like a water system where it's a put and take. You take a certain amount of water and you pay for it. So I think we have some code issues to reconcile there. As we analyzed it, we're not a homogeneous county, so it's not like you're in Virginia Beach and everybody's similar and everybody can pay a utility. We've got rural customers and we've got urban customers. So I think there's not a good model. So I'd be interested. We came down to we almost have to tax under some form to pay for it, or at least a service district tax, which could be broken up into service areas. But under the current state legislative authority, we got service districts, we got general taxation, we have utilities. And I think the utilities codes have some holes for communities like ours.
Thank you very much. I've been given the signal that our time has run out. Mike, Steve, and I will be around for a while to answer your questions individually. I think we've reached the end of the session. There's so much to talk about. If you look at our legislative program, because of all of the different types of things that environmental sort of functions tend to cover, that's why that's probably about the longest section of our legislative program, and now we see why. Anyway, thank you very much. I think we're getting ready for the next session, and we will be around for the next session.